pause before the work of this day to confess, to give thanks, to share our burdens and to pray for our city and our councillors. We confess the ways we've become weary and worn by a political process more often marked by venom than by grace. Save us from weak resignation. Remind us of our power to seek the welfare of this city. We pray for all elected officials entrusted with the holy calling of public service. We pray for those in positions of authority both nationally and locally. We pray for Elizabeth, our Queen, for our Prime Minister, for our City Mayor and Ceremonial Mayor. We pray for the residents of the city and the constituents that we serve. Bless the work that is before this City Council today. May every decision we make, every phone call we pick up, every email we respond to be done with generosity of spirit. And particularly today, bless us with good relationships, strong accountability, sound decisions, effective budgeting, and servant hearts for the good of our community. Remind us of the truth of the words of Jeremiah when he said that in the welfare of the city we find our own welfare. In all we do, in all we say, may we seek the welfare of this city. We know you by many names, but this prayer we offer in the name and in the spirit of Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Evan. Can everybody be seated? Do we have any apologies today for this meeting? Thank you. Any more?
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor. Declarations of interest. Do any members have any personal, prejudicial or disclosable pecuniary interest that they need to declare at this meeting? No? Thank you very much. Item 3 on the agenda is appointment of the local returning officer for the Greater Manchester mayoral election. Can I ask the monitoring officer to present this report?
Yes, Chair, thank you.
Sorry.
Yes, Chair, thank you. The Combined Authority Mayoral Elections Order formally requires that each constituent council of the Combined Authority appoint an officer of the council to be the local returning officer. The details of the various orders are set out there, and the final legislation became law on the 31st of January 2017. That requires this council to make an appointment. It needed to be done at this meeting in order to allow the appointment to take effect in advance of the May elections. So the recommendation is that the City Director, Jim Taylor, is appointed as the local returning officer for Salford at the Greater Manchester Combined Authority mayoral elections.
Does the Council approve the City Director, Jim Taylor, to be appointed to the returning officer for Salford, Greater Manchester Combined Authority mayoral elections? No, not today. Item 4 on the agenda is the Local Audit Accountability Act 2014. It's an invitation to become an opted-in authority. Again, could I ask the lead member for Finance and Support Services to present the report?
All right.
we're going.
Yes, Madam Chair. As people no doubt know, this audit has changed a number of years ago, and now they're in the process of having to change again. I'll just quickly move on to the recommendations that are there. It is recommended that the City Mayor and members note the current position in respect of arrangements for the appointment of external auditors and confirm the proposed approach agreed by the Audit and Accounts Committee and the S151 officer in option to the sector-led body appointed by the Secretary of State under the Act Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited. All the details are there in front of you. There were 3 options, and we are opting and recommending option 3, Chair. I don't think I need go into it any more than that. Thanks, Chair. Of course, I'll answer any questions if I can.
Thank you, Councillor Hines. Are there any questions of Councillor Hines? Yes, Councillor Clarkson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's less a question, just a quick comment. I just wanted to thank the members of the Audit and Accounts Committee for their work on this. We considered the range of options, and I think, having looked at all the implications of the various models, option 3 was the best fit for this council. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Any more questions or comments? No. Can I then ask if the council will approve the opt-in to the sector-led body appointed by the Secretary of State under the Act, the Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited, as detailed in the report? And Councillor Hines, did you say it was option 3? Option 3. All in favour, please show. Thank you. Right, can we now move on to the main item on the agenda, which is the revenue budget and capital. I believe you're going to say a few words, the monitoring officer.
Yes, Chair. Through you, there is an amended motion to put before the Council. The motion is that the Council permit a variation to the Constitution for the purpose of this meeting and agree a variation of speech times for this particular item, rather than limit the speakers to 5 minutes. Would you like me to run through this,
Yes,
Chair?
yes.
So the proposal would be that the running order for the motion, if the suspension and amendment of rules is agreed, would be that the City Mayor move his budget for 10 minutes, and the seconder, who can reserve the right to speak, then has a further 10 minutes allocated. There is an opposition amendment, which there is 10 minutes for the mover, and again a seconder for 10 minutes with the ability to reserve. Then comments on the amendment from members with a maximum of 20 minutes allocated. Seconder then obviously to speak if reserved, and then the City Mayor or the Executive Lead Member to respond to the amendment. There'll be a named vote on the amendment and a named vote on the actual motion. It's proposed that there'd be a break at 11:10, and then, subject to the outcome of the amendment, any further comments on the substantive motion would follow thereafter.
Is that clear?
Is that clear to everybody? But I've just got one comment. The City Director has just commented to me that the City Mayor has not been given a time limit. So if we're suspending these orders, it would mean that there will be less time for questions and comments. So I'm just putting that to councillors. If they wish the City Mayor to speak for longer than 10 minutes, it will eat into the questions and comments. So we've suspended the time, so we'll be fine. Okay? Thank you.
Do they want to do it?
Do you want to suspend the rules and go ahead with the ones that... Thank you. I've totally lost it now. Right. The City Mayor to move the budget and to make his introductory speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm here today to recommend that Council approve my budget for 2017-18. This is my first budget as City Mayor for Salford. It is a city I am immensely proud to have served over the past 5 years as Councillor for Langworthy and as City Mayor currently. I believe this budget represents, as far as is possible, a responsible and fair set of proposals given the financial situation we are facing as an authority. Let me first outline the technical and statutory elements of the budget I am presenting to Council today. I am recommending an overall revenue budget of £202,208,000 for 2017-18. I'm also recommending a capital programme of £68,651,000 for 2017-18, using the resources set out in Part 3 of my report. In accordance with the formal resolution set in Appendix 6, I am proposing a council tax requirement of £91,845,000 in accordance with the legislation. A basic amount of council tax of £1,444.71 and an amount for each valuation band in accordance with the legislation, and an amount of council tax for each valuation band in accordance with Section 30 and 36 of the Local Government Finance Act 1992. I'm also recommending that Council approves the Housing Revenue Account budget for 2017-18 of £15,446,000. Finally, from a technical point of view, I am recommending that the Council approve the Treasury Management Prudential Indicators for 2017-18 to 2019-20 as set out in Part 4 of my report. I now want to turn to the main part of my speech today, and I have to be honest, this is not something I was looking forward to. It's not something I take pleasure in doing. Today, let's make no bones about it, we are making £15.8 million worth of cuts to Salford City Council's budget. We're entering our 7th year of government-imposed austerity, having lost £186 million from our budget since 2010. This is equivalent to £64,000 every single day over that period of time under this Tory government. This year, a further £15.8 million, as I've already indicated, will be taken from the budget. And obviously this is hitting our services, which have already been cut to the bone. And it's hitting the people who work for this City Council and the people that rely on our services really hard. On our last full meeting, I presented a list of services which have been lost since the onset of austerity and local government cuts. These include raising the threshold of entitlement for care support, seeing a loss of over 200 care packages for individuals classed with moderate needs, entirely removing the Supporting People Service, a reduction of £1.2 million, resulting in the loss of services to homelessness and older people, reducing support around works and skills for adults by over 80%, the ending of funding to all but one homelessness accommodation service in the city, the Salvation Army, the complete cessation of funding to sheltered services, transferring the costs onto those individuals themselves, the closure of 4 youth centres, raising the threshold to access those for other people within the city. And that's a reduction of £1.5 million in youth services. A reduction of children's services spend by 30% per head, over £19.8 million, and the closure of 11 children's centres. The problems we face in Salford are not in isolation. Across the country, Tory economic policy is causing severe disruption and chaos within our public services. The NHS is in crisis, having suffered the worst year since it was founded in 1948. Waiting lists are increasing, debt is mounting, and the sight of hospital beds in corridors regularly characterises daily papers, news clips and media reports. Homelessness is more and more visible on our streets, and our food banks are facing historic levels of demand. Hunger and destitution has shockingly become the norm of 21st century Britain. Adult social care is struggling, with consensus amongst professionals that the budget and resourcing pressures inflicted by the present government policies are not sustainable, with the current funding gap for social care standing at £2.6 billion by 2020. But although we're not alone here in Salford, we are suffering more than many other local authorities in this country. We have been one of the hardest hit local authorities in the country in terms of funding changes, having lost over 40% of our budget in direct funding. That's through grant reduction and increased costs from this government. According to the Local Government Association, the cost of the government's living wage increases this year alone is expected to cost English local authorities £600 million. And the adult social care precept, which councils are being forced to levy, is only expected to raise £543 million, again creating further budget pressures for local authorities. The government's living wage, which incidentally excludes those under 25 and isn't actually a real true living wage, is going to cost English city councils £600 million this year. And no extra funding is coming forward, by and large, to actually pay for this. And further changes to funding from government continue to hit Salford disproportionately. In response to the crisis in adult social care, government have raided another funding pot. Salford's new home bonus took £3.5 million off us in December. That was our Christmas present from the government last year. In real terms, this has left Salford £2.3 million worse off than before. And over the course of the next 3 years, we will see an estimated loss of £6.8 million in new homes bonus. On the government's own index of multiple deprivation, Salford is ranked as the 22nd most deprived local authority in the country. With the 38th highest level of personal debt, 26% of our children live in poverty, and 1 in every 36 households has had to visit a food bank, according to our latest data. Government funding solutions continue to be developed using a crude per capita logic of distribution, ignoring real, true social need within our communities and neighbourhoods. In response to these measures and these dire circumstances we find ourselves in, we've undertaken numerous representations to government. Our last council, we unanimously passed a motion condemning the dishonesty of the government shuffling money from one pile to the next, providing paltry sums to address their own crisis in social care, whilst forcing local councils to increase council tax to pay for these services. On the basis of this, we've written to the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Sajid Javid, and the Secretary of State for Health, Jeremy Hunt. We've also participated in the Department for Communities and Local Government's technical consultation on the Revenue Support Grant. On Monday of this week, I led a delegation to London to meet with the Minister for Local Government, Marcus Jones, MP, along with 2 of our Members of Parliament, Rebecca Long-Bailey and Barbara Keeley, also joined by Councillor Merry and the Leader of the Opposition, Councillor Turner, and a representative from Greater Manchester's Chamber of Commerce. Unlike the leafy Tory authority of Surrey, there was apparently no sweetheart deal available for Labour-run Salford, despite us making the evidence-based case that austerity and local government cuts are fundamentally not working. Whatever deal has been struck with Surrey, we know this is Tory cronyism at its worst. And let us not forget that last year, around this time, Surrey received news from the then Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Greg Clark, that they'd be receiving £24 million in transitional grant, the largest single amount awarded to any council in the country. And that's along with 19 million to Hampshire, 16 million to Herefordshire, 14 million to Essex, 11 million to Kent, 9 million to Buckinghamshire, and another 9 million to Oxfordshire. Many of you will know, just from reading out those names, that most of those local authorities are in the south of the country. It is in hard times like these that the true priorities of a local authority truly show in their budget decisions. That's why I'm proud to announce that despite the hard choices and the cuts that we've been forced to make by this Tory government, it is this year's 2017-18 budget within which we're committing over £3 million in funds to fund anti-poverty initiatives and services. This announcement comes only a week after the launch and declaration of our citywide anti-poverty strategy and the publication of our strategy document, No One Left Behind. This money will include £170,000 for Salford's Credit Union to help provide more affordable credit from a responsible lender to help tackle debt, loan sharks and payday lenders within our city. The Credit Union will also move to their new home at Brotherton House in Pendleton, embarking on a new beginning and a new strategic partnership with the City Council. We'll also be putting £300,000 into Salford's discretionary support scheme to help the vulnerable people on low incomes. The scheme provides short-term support for people who are in crisis situation in our city, unable to make the basic needs, unable to pay for food, unable to pay for heating. These are disgraceful situations. £70,000 will also be put into welfare rights and debt advice service within the City Council, providing independent advice and support to local people. Salford's Women Aid will also benefit from a £10,000 award to help those fleeing from domestic abuse and domestic violence with nowhere to live. The Warms Homes initiative will see a £33,000 increase to help keep Warms home for the vulnerable residents in our city. And as a result of feedback from the community and trade union consultation, as part of the budget setting process, £240,000 will continue to be provided for our youth services. £150,000 will be provided to recruit 5 new social workers to join our team, reducing our dependency on private agency staff. Last but not least, in this raft of new proposals, I'm proud to announce that we'll also be putting £2 million worth of investment into our pilot scheme to build affordable homes for rent as part of this year's capital budget. This is a programme which will tackle our housing shortage head-on, as we will provide a universal model through which local authorities such as ours are able to build affordable council-controlled housing to work towards meeting the demand left open through widespread market failure and a failure in Tory government housing policy. The future for Salford, despite our present challenges, remains bright. We continue to remain resilient in dealing with Tory government cuts and austerity, ensuring that the proceeds of growth that we have fought to create will be distributed fairly within our city. We are just beginning to benefit fully from the investments in Media City and the Quays over the past few decades, with returns from business rates increasing and many new residents flocking towards Hull and Broughton, making Salford their home, bringing with them much-needed council tax revenues. Salford is fast becoming the place to be in Greater Manchester. This is, in my opinion, Salford's time. Our arts and cultural scene are flourishing thanks in part to our fantastic regeneration team and the development work made possible through our ambitious capital programme. In Salford, despite the protests of the opposition, we have invested to grow because we know the Tory government's infatuation with the City of London, the South and the South East is unlikely to change anytime soon. With £1,943 being spent per person in London on current or planned infrastructure projects compared with just £427 in the North. This is according to recent research by IPPR North. With the imbalance in transport infrastructure investment between London and the rest of England set to get worse, with more than half, that's 54% of spending of the country's transport going to the capital, going to the City of London. We have to do things for ourselves because clearly the Tory government aren't interested in Salford. Our hard work, in my opinion, is paying off, and we are beginning to see the process and the development of a new economy for our young people. The profusion of the creative and digital industries in the Keys provides huge opportunities for well-paid and skilled work. And as part of developments at Port Salford, as they continue to present opportunities for the returning of manufacturing, logistics and industry to the city, attracted by our warehousing and freight facilities. This is a better and brighter future for many of our young people to look forward to. In an age when many are staring down the barrel of unemployment, job insecurity, zero-hour contracts and low pay. This year has been one of the most involving budget consultations in a decade, and we're pleased to announce that we've seen increase in participation to 872 public responses this year from 80 in 2015-16. Throughout this process, we've worked alongside our trade unions, the public and the city's partners and our staff to find solutions to the tough problems faced when budgeting through austerity. We're committed to continuing this open dialogue with staff, trade unions, making sure every resident of our city has a chance to have their say. And I'm proud to say that there is one key concern of residents throughout this process that we've been able to make some changes on. I'd further like to announce a further investment of £300,000 into street cleaning facilities, a substantial contribution to maintaining a pleasant environment in Salford. This investment could pay for 16 full-time employees, a night sweeping service, litter bin emptying 7 days a week, further support for our friends groups and street champions, and the creation of an entirely new Parks Lynn bin scheme. Together with work, we want to make our streets safer, cleaner, greener and more pleasant to everyone. Although times are hard under Tory austerity, the mayoral team continue to do our utmost for the people of this city. Though budget pressures are absolutely immense, the sensible spending and investments of previous Labour administrations are starting to bear fruit. We have a future of growth to look forward to, but it is our job to ensure that growth is inclusive. The wealth of society should be distributed equitably. Social justice is not an act of charity, but a moral duty. Today we're beginning to see the benefits of this growth, and today we're being asked to vote on a budget that's before you, and although many big decisions will be made, this is not the end. This is not the end of the road, and we'll continue to have conversations with staff, trade unions, partners and residents over the coming year in our fight to make Salford a better and fairer city. Thank you very much.
Thank you, City Mayor. Could I ask who is seconding the motion? Thank you, Councillor Hines. I believe that the opposition are now moving an amendment. Presumably that's Councillor Clarkson. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to move an amendment. I believe Councillor Turner has to second it now.
Yes, I will second it. As it should. Anyone else?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to present to the Council today amendments to the 2017-18 revenue budget and the 2018-19 revenue budget as proposed by the City Mayor. Before I begin, I'd like to extend my heartfelt thanks to the officers who supported the Conservative Group in putting forward this amendment. Their continued professionalism and hard work on behalf of the City does us credit. Members will note that this year we've gone back to a blank page, and we're offering up today a relatively modest amendment to the programme set forward. I'm loath to criticise the revenue budget as it stands, so much of it being what I proposed from this point in 2015. I'm especially heartened by the additional money for street cleaning services. We'd have loved to have seen that 24 months ago. In reality, this is not the budget that the group would have put forward. Our spending priorities in previous years would have been understandably different. However, as I'm so fond of saying, we are where we are. This is not to say that we would not have been bolder in our savings plans had the option been there. We did look at a range of options, and we have decided in this instance that we will opt for a small proposal, which will do a lot of good for local people. There is a point at which you can just be too dramatic for the sake of it. Our proposals put forward here will produce a balanced budget for the year 2017-18 with a small additional saving of £142,000 in 18-19. Proposals include additional savings of £742,000, which will be used to introduce a Better Communities Devolved Fund. This will be administered at a neighbourhood level and focus on local environment and infrastructure projects. The additional savings in 18-19 can be used to partially offset the shortfall that's currently predicted for 18-19, and that position will enable us to be bolder going forwards. The proposals set out in Section 5B of the agenda identify additional savings and the application of those savings to create the Better Communities Devolved Fund. The net result of these amendments has no impact on the level of gross expenditure within the 2017-18 budget. Therefore, there should be no change to the proposed council tax levels. We are mindful of the fact that the budget is a tough balancing act at the moment, and we don't feel that now is an appropriate time to start cutting tax again just for the sake of it. Therefore, there would be, the council tax resolution would mirror that of the City Mayor, and there is therefore no requirement to present a revised council tax resolution in this instance. I commend this amendment to the council and hope that it will be met with honest consideration, and it will be viewed in the light that it was intended, which is to do the most for empowering the people of Salford to make decisions about their community and how they would like to see it grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clarkson. Who's seconding the motion?
The amendments.
The amendment, sorry.
I am Chair and I reserve the right to speak later.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Now we want comments on the amendment from members. I understand Councillor Merry's got his hand up. Is there anybody else wants to say anything? Councillor Ferguson. Anybody else? No? Thank you. Councillor Merry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I suppose I ought to start by saying something nice about the mover of the alternative budget. At least we got the proposals in advance, so that is a step forward, I think, for the Conservative group. Although they still look as though they're worked out on the back of a fag packet, at least we got the fag packet in the council papers this time rather than hurriedly put together on the actual day. I want to start by just saying something very nice about the Mayor, if I break the habit of a lifetime, because I thought it was a magnificent speech, actually. I thought it covered the whole range of the national problems that we face and also set very clear priorities for the administration that he heads up. This is the first budget that he's had to give, and it's clear that it reflects the priorities that he campaigned for in May and promised the people of Salford that he would attempt to deliver. Now, of course,
It's been harder and been made harder by the actions of this government, which I'm going to come on to in a moment. But the reality of the situation is this is an administration that is delivering on behalf of the people of Salford. And when I compare what I could only describe as the people's budget against the Toffs budget that we've heard from the other side, you know, this is a huge difference in terms of approach, in terms of recognising the poverty and the difficulties that the people of this city are experiencing against a vicious attack. And I can only say it's a vicious attack. And I can understand why the Tories didn't want to talk about their proposals today, not mention them once. A tax on sickness benefit, a tax on the right of trade unions to represent their members, a tax on the working conditions of people, a tax on things like the Working Class Museum, which celebrates a particular part of culture which they don't understand. All of that was part of their budget proposals. Did you hear them mention it? Did you hear them actually say something? Just a promise that the budget is balanced. Now, some of us may remember in this chamber councillors from the opposition proposing budget cuts and council tax cuts time after time. And some of you may wonder why they've not mentioned really council tax today and said, oh, well, it's going to be the same. I'll tell you why. It's because the vast majority of the council tax increase that we are being forced to propose in this chamber is their responsibility. It's their government that is telling us we've got to increase our council tax by 3% in order to pay for social care. And in fact, even their leader of the Conservative group here doesn't believe that. He believes that it should be paid for by general taxation. Just for once, I actually agree with him. That is the way to actually pay for the pressures in terms of social care, not to put further burdens upon the people of Salford, and a particularly disproportionate burden on the people of Salford compared to, say, the people of Surrey, for example. And it was very interesting when we went round. The only thing I was sad about, because the Minister did listen to us, is he didn't seem to have an advisor called Nick at the table with him, who no doubt was still busy negotiating the sweetheart deal with Surrey that we are not privy to, actually. Now, we have these proposals in front of us. These proposals about making the workforce pay for what we're actually trying to achieve, these proposals about trying to find money for environmental initiatives when we've found money after struggle to actually do something about the streets that people tell us time after time that we need to do something about. Now, of course, I understand there's a by-election going on at the moment in which the Tories are talking about 3 weekly bin collections. I may have escaped it. Perhaps it's somewhere in some supplementary proposal that they've got, but I don't actually see any mention of stopping the 3 weekly bin collections in their proposals. Funny that, isn't it? You know, they've actually obviously looked at the situation, know they can't deliver it, and preferred not to mention it. And I can understand why they're not talking about the record of their government. So we're in a situation now where there are two competing visions in this chamber. There is a vision about supporting those people at the bottom of the pile in Salford who are suffering as a result of austerity, doing something about it, putting extra provision in terms of building new homes for rent, putting extra provision in terms of the youth service, in terms of cleaning the streets, in terms of the anti-poverty initiatives we're talking about, and an image that is nasty and vindictive, wants to attack the workforce, wants to simply see them pay for the excesses of their current government. That's what they want to do. They want to make sure that the people at the bottom of the pile pay for austerity. I know which vision I prefer, and I know which vision I want to fight for. I lost my mother this year. My mother was a councillor for many years in Staffordshire and Cannock Chase, and my father, as some of you know, was a councillor in Birmingham. And one thing they always brought me up to believe is that the job of the council is not to represent a narrow section of society. The job of the council is to do the best for the city or the area that they represent. I think the Mayor has made a magnificent start to actually achieving that. I think we are the party now, we are the party who will speak for the people of this city. Unfortunately, we have an opposition now who seems only interested in speaking for a narrow sectional interest. And I'm afraid we're seeing what their vision is going to be like of a post-Brexit Britain where the workforce is attacked, where they pay for the consequences of the mistakes that the Tory government has made. We will fight for the people of this city. We will continue to deliver growth for the people of this city despite all the best efforts of the government, and we will ensure that every single person in this city enjoys the benefit of what we are fighting for. Thank you.
Councillor Ferguson.
Here we go again. I'm not going to repeat everything I said last year, even though what we've got on the piece of paper is very much what we had last year. I would say, though, I noticed that the Working Class Movement Library appears on here again, and I would remind you that last year I offered you an invitation to visit the Working Class Movement Library. Councillors from this side took up that offer. I've got to say that nobody from that side of the chamber took up the offer, and I'm certainly not making that offer again to you this year. But if you want to approach me or the Working Class Movement Library, we'll do it that way. Councillor Merry made reference to this proposal being prepared on the back of a cigarette packet. Let me remind you that cigarette packets come with a health warning. And in relation to the health warning, I want to specifically relate to the proposal that is to, the first one on there, a reduction of sickness entitlements by 50%. I'll speak in some detail on this. Let me tell you what the entitlement is for our staff. In the first year of employment, they get 1 month of full pay, and after 4 months of service, they get 2 months on half pay. In the second year of employment, it's 2 months on full pay and 2 months on half pay. On the third year of employment, it's 4 months on full pay and 4 months on half pay. And on the fourth and fifth years of employment, it's 5 months on full pay and 5 months on half pay. And after 5 completed years, it's 6 months on full pay and 6 months on half pay. Now, what isn't clear from these proposals is how the opposition are proposing to change those sickness pay rates that we pay. But what you need to be aware of is that the occupational sick pay scheme that this council operates is a national scheme contained within Part 2 of the NJC Green Book Agreement and is applicable to all local authorities. And it constitutes a standard throughout the UK and cannot be challenged by local agreement and negotiation. And if the opposition were on this side of the chamber and wanting to implement this, I don't think they'd get agreement from the trade unions, and therefore to implement it, what they would have to do is dismiss every member of staff and re-employ them. That is the reality of the proposal that's being put forward here today in relation to the employment, the sick pay of the staff that work for us. The hard-working staff, I want to say, that going out of the way to serve the people of this city. There's no indication in the calculations in relation to the reducing numbers of staff that we've got here. So I would be interested to know, when we get a reply, on how this particular proposal is intended to be implemented.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Councillor Reid, no? Thank you. Sorry. Any more comments or questions? Councillor Antrobus.
It's not surprising that Councillor Ferguson points to the fact that the opposition cannot justify their amendment and how it would be implemented, because we all know that it's a fake amendment. It's done for effect. They have no intention of putting forward something that can be carried through. What is really important about this amendment is what it says about Conservative Party values and priorities. What is this mysterious Community Environment Fund they want to establish? There are no details to it. We can only assume that it means that a community group in Worsley could apply for some money to plant some daffodils on the roundabout in Worsley. So to enable people to do that, what are they saying? We will cut sick pay. That's all you need to say to demonstrate what the real values of the Conservative Party are. We've heard them there list all the terrible things that are happening to our services in this city. And do they say, oh, we'll try and save some money to protect some of those services? Will we do something for the disadvantaged? No. Daffodils in Worsley is what their great cry for equality and democracy is. We believe in more important things than that. We believe in actually focusing on the disadvantaged, not empowering the privileged.
Thank you, Councillor Antrobus. Any more questions or comments? I believe, Councillor Turner, you are going to second the amendment.
I quite thought there'd be a lot more comments. I presume by the silence from the other benches they are in approval of our amendment. Certainly I didn't read daffodils into it. I don't know where you got that from, Councillor Antrobus, but...
so won't people be able to do that?
Well, they can do that if they wish. Even you can plant daffodils if you so wish, if you've got a nice garden, and I hope you do. They're rather nice. The Welsh like them anyway. Just before I start, I'm not going to say a lot on this, Madam Chair, but Councillor Merris started off with his opinion of the City Mayor's speech. I'm not sure what that had to do with our amendment, but I just want to be assured that I will be able to give my opinion on what I think of the City Mayor's speech after the break. Is that correct? Sure.
Yes, you will be able to speak after the break.
Anyway, the amendment is clear. It's pretty plain. It's in line with what we usually put forward, as you will notice. The funny thing about our amendments are, I mean, usually, as I say, we usually get a lot more flack than we've had today, and I appreciate that we haven't had flack, so I'm taking it, I'm assuming, like Councillor Antrobus assumes, that it's approval. But you're putting me off now, Bill. The thing is, we have always found that when we put forward amendments, we're always accused of putting them forward on the back of a fag packet. Well, the gentleman in charge doesn't smoke, preparing the budget. It might be on a bottle, but it's not going to be on a fag packet. The thing is this, we've always found that our proposals are generally accepted a year or two along the line. They come in for intense criticism, but you usually adopt them in the end. You see the light in the end. But, of course, I know that you couldn't possibly agree with us on anything. I mean, it's not in your blood. You can't agree on anything. So, but I would say that most residents do like a nice, clean, tidy place where they live. And we have always been of the opinion that the environment is so terribly important. It matters to people, not just our voters, but everyone's voters. They don't like to see litter They don't like to get on that metro and see all that litter about. You know it's all there. You know it's in Eccles. It's everywhere, and it's not nice, and it gives the wrong impression to visitors. We're trying to grow Salford as a place to work and live, and the thing that puts people off is a lot of litter. And really, that's where our priorities are, and that is why we would like to give that to the people in the various wards to make their decisions where they would like it to be spent. I mean, we already do it under the devolved budget, and I think that's a great thing. I really do. But I'm not going to go on at length on this, but I do think that the marketing and communication budget does need reductions. I think there is room there. I mean, we get this public news every day on our emails. Old news. It's all old news. I mean, that's not necessary. I get sick and tired of it. My deleted box is full of it. You know, and that, on a Monday we get the bonus. We get all the weekend's papers. You know, why do we do this? You know, and then we've got decision notices issued, which we all are made aware of, and then we have a press release from the City Mayor telling us the exact same thing. That's not on, in my opinion. There is room for savings there. But at the end of the day, the budget is the Mayor's budget. The Mayor has the cake. How he slices it is his position, it's his point. And he has obviously got different priorities to us. So all I would say, I would implore you to adopt this. I think it's very worthwhile, and I hope you'll be able to find the spirit to vote for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. I believe the City Mayor or the Executive Lead Member, is it the City Mayor who's speaking, replying, or?
No, not replying to the amendment.
We just need to vote on the amendment.
No, we've moved to a name vote.
On the amendment?
Oh, they can. Yeah, they can.
Yes, sorry. It says on my notes here that the City Mayor or the Executive Lead Member can respond to the amendment. Now, I know, don't jump up till I've finished. Can you decide who's going to do it? Thank you.
I'll do it. We can both do it if you want.
Well, you've got... Can I tell you, you've got 5 minutes each, and if I know Councillor Hines normally goes longer than 5 minutes, so you have 5 minutes.
Well, I'm going to surprise you, Madam Chair. I said on Monday night what this is worth, give it short shrift. It's not worth debating, in my opinion. It's the same as last year. The points have been made. I have no more to say than that. So I've surprised you all today.
Well, that's a first. Thank you very much. City Mayor.
In responding to, obviously, the amendments before us, I find it really interesting that the Tories have the audacity to tell us that in a year or two's time we'll end up implementing their proposals, because we do that anyway. That is absolute nonsense. Year on year, Tory amendments to this budget, certainly as long as I've been on this council, have absolutely hammered terms and conditions of employment for the staff who work for this local authority. The staff that work for this local authority are working harder now than they've ever worked in their lives because of what? Your austerity. 186 million, let's remind ourselves, has been taken from this government's budget. We're asking our staff now to work harder than they ever have worked in their lives as a consequence of that. And that is in a context of increased demand for public services. This is an absolute disgrace what you're proposing here with regards to sickness pay. I'm absolutely horrified. One of the things the Labour Council has always done in this chamber is protect terms and conditions of employment. We've actually gone one step further than that. We are the only accredited living wage employer in Greater Manchester. You know, we fundamentally believe in paying people decent wages and decent terms and conditions of employment. Why? Because it means better outcomes for the people of this city, better quality of services. So these amendments are absolutely bonkers. The other amendment as well around communications I find quite interesting. It's the Tory opposition who time and time again are telling me that I need to improve communications and do more of it. And here they are actually telling us that we need to slash our budget by 50%. I mean, this is absolute ridiculous. Quite clearly, it is on the back of a fag packet. It might not be Councillor Clarkson's fag packet, but it certainly is mate's. Let's just put it that way. In terms of trade unions, so you draw attention to the fact that we spend £95,000 on supporting our trade unions. The trade unions play a really important role within this local authority. We talk about accountability. One of the ways we are accountable as a council is through the work we do with our trade unions, who keep our feet to the fire on budget proposals and ask challenging questions, and quite rightly do so, and also keep my mayoral team to account for some of the proposals that have been brought forward. You've already heard in my budget speech, conversations will continue throughout the next financial year with members of staff, with trade unions, about some of the proposals that haven't been finely tuned and finessed. It's absolutely critical we spend money on recognising the role of trade unions within the local authority. They play a really important role, and actually proposing scrapping the money we actually give to the trade unions to do this really important work is, again, bonkers. Then in terms of the Working Class Movement Library, let's not forget this is an international institution within this city. People come from all over the world to go to the Working Class Movement Library. This brings people to our city. This improves our tourism offer. This is fundamentally the right thing to do. And it's only costing this city council £21,000 in terms of our support for the Working Class Movement Library. And as Councillor Merry has also highlighted, it's really important that we keep the history of the Labour movement alive within this country. Why is that important? Because people need to know how horrific Tory governments are and what they do to the working classes within society. That's very important. Down the road we have the People's History Museum doing the same sort of thing in Manchester. I'm proud to stand by these two critical cultural, heritage and historical institutions within Greater Manchester. I've got nothing more to say other than that this is clearly a waste of time. Thank you.
Thank you, City Mayor. Can we now move to the vote on the amendment? We're having a name vote. The monitoring officer will go through the names of the councillors. It's an amendment.
So this would replace everything else?
No.
Well, it's been put forward as an amendment.
So it's, all right, it's a partial amendment now.
Yes, a partial amendment. Yes, Chair. When I call members' names, could you answer yes or no, please? City Mayor Dennett. You're voting in favour of the amendment or against?
Oh, sorry. Certainly not in favour of the amendment.
Councillor Antrobus, in favour or against?
Against.
Councillor Barnes.
Against.
Councillor Bellamy.
Against.
Councillor Bentham.
Against.
Councillor Boschel.
Against.
Councillor Brocklehurst.
Against.
Councillor Birch.
Against.
Councillor Clark. Councillor Clarkson. Councillor Collinson. Councillor Compton. Councillor Peter Connor.
Against.
Councillor Critchley. Councillor Dawson. Councillor Ferguson. Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Robin Garrido. Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Hesling. Councillor Hines. Councillor Humphreys. Councillor Hunt. Councillor Jolly. Councillor Kelly. Councillor King. Councillor Lancaster. Councillor Lee. Councillor Lewis. Councillor Longshaw. Councillor McIntyre. Councillor Merry. Councillor Mullen. Councillor Reynolds. Councillor Sharp. Councillor Stone. Councillor Taylor. Councillor Turner. Councillor Walsh. Councillor Warmisham. Councillor Watkin. Councillor Weir. Councillor Wheeler. Councillor Michael Wheeler. Councillor Peter Wheeler. Councillor Wilson. Councillor Paul Wilson. Councillor Ronnie Wilson. The amendment is not carried.
Yep. The amendment's not carried. Are we going to break or carry on?
Well, we were due to break, so we were due to break in 10 minutes, but if we break now, that's a good place to do it.
Should break now. The Council will now break before we discuss the main the motion before. Thank you.
Just been asked the length of the break. It'll be 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Please be seated. Thank you very much. We are now up to comments on the substantive motion which the City Mayor moved. Does anybody want to ask any questions? Any comments?
Councillor Mulgrew. Councillor Reynolds.
Turner.
Councillor Fletcher.
Turner, Reynolds.
Did you get one? Because he was first.
Well, it doesn't matter. You can fit in whenever. Fletcher. Fletcher, yeah. Stone. And who was the other one? Stone, Councillor Stone and Jolly. Councillor Jolly.
You've got Councillor King on there as well.
Councillor King. Just bear with me while I make a list of everybody. Councillor Lancaster. Are we okay now? Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to do alternate, if that's all right. Yeah. Councillor.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Kelly.
Sorry, I didn't see you, Councillor Kelly. Right. Right, can I start with Councillor Turner, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're going to have to forgive me, I'm sucking a sweet because I've had a cough, and for some reason there doesn't seem to be much water out in the foyer. I don't know whether that would be a Tory cut or not. I sincerely hope not. Right. I would like to make a few comments on the City Mayor's budget. It is his budget, and he is responsible for it, as he accepts. But before I start, I would like to thank him and the Deputy Mayor for inviting me to attend the meeting in London with the Government Minister. And it is true to say that I believe, and I do hope my colleagues believe, that adult social care should not be funded out of council tax. It should come from direct taxation of the government. I also told the Minister that all governments had shirked their responsibility in this respect. It's got to be seen to. You can't shove it under the carpet, and it's got to be dealt with. And I do hope he told the respective people of our views. But who knows? Anyway, I was well looked after by the Deputy City Mayor and the City Mayor. 12 hours with him. I'm the envy of all my party. I'll say no more on that. But what I will say is I do admire the City Mayor's passion, and I know he really believes in what he says. That is quite clear. It's come over time and time again. And he really believes a Labour government with Mr Corbyn will be the answer to all the problems. Right? The only problem is the country do not share that view. And you've only got to look at opinion polls to see the way things are going. But that said, we have heard an awful lot about Tory cuts, Tory this and Tory that. I think we have to ask ourselves, and I think he has to ask himself, why? Why are we in the position we are in today? No, I shall tell you. The position we're in today is because in 1997 the Labour Party came to power. After 13 years of Labour government, things did not get better. When the Conservatives or the coalition took control, there was no money left. And that was made clear by Liam Byrne. I don't know what he does nowadays, but he left this note saying there is no money left. Right? So the coalition were left with a massive debt and a huge deficit. And as Labour's Liam Byrne said in his note, there is no money left. We had a hugely increased army of public sector workers to go with our huge deficit, huge welfare payments. We were living, basically, way beyond our means. We were living beyond our means, and something had to be done urgently to bring things back to a sustainable financial situation. The public understand this. Now, the Labour leadership keep on about cuts, but as the Prime Minister told the Labour leader in the House, it's actually called living within our means. And all people in this country must live within their means, including the government. This is something that people on this side do not seem to understand. They don't seem to get it. They just harp on, don't seem to get the fact that we are where we are because we have a deficit and a huge debt, and something's got to be done. And spending money isn't the way. Borrowing money isn't the way. And that's what happened. And we're in that state, and we've got to get out of it. So we have to spend less, reduce the deficit, so we in turn can make a start to pay off the debt mountain. And of course, we must grow the economy. Work must pay. To get a strong, sustainable economy, this is the only way we will pay for the things we want. Only a strong economy can provide. The good news is we are doing exactly that. It's working. Yes. Yesterday, 9 billion surplus was announced. Yesterday, 9 billion surplus was announced. Well, no one said anything about that, did they? No one says, why are we where we are? All we do is carp on about all these cuts and all this, as if we were the only council that had to make cuts. We're not. The government run the whole country, not Salford. Anyway, as I say, it's working. The deficit's coming down. Employment's at 74.6%, the highest since comparable records began. Over 70% in full-time work. Unemployment, the lowest for 11 years. Wages growing at 2.6, with over 750,000 vacancies at any one time. Youth unemployment, the lowest since 2005. Disabled in work increased by 594,000 in the past 3 years. The rate of women in work is at a record high of 70%. The number of people claiming benefits is at its lowest rate since 1974. We have to compare this with our Labour friends' opposites record. Youth unemployment rose by 44% under Labour. Unemployment rose by 500,000. Unemployment under women rose by 26%. Long-term unemployment doubled from 381,000 to 788,000. In 2020, the people of this great country will again have to choose who they can trust on the economy, who they trust. There is no doubt in my mind that it will be a victory for the Conservative Party. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Could I ask Councillor Stone, please?
Thank you, Chair. Since 2010, children's services have seen cuts of almost £20 million, 30% reduction per head. At the same time, we've seen rapid growth of the child population in Salford with a 6% increase, or over 3,500 extra children. We've created the equivalent of 25 primary classes, and despite the pressures for on-time applications, we've been able to ensure siblings stay together and no child is placed further away than the statutory distance. In fact, our approach to pupil-placed planning is being held up by the DFE as good practice. This growth is continuing, and projections show we need an additional 50 primary classes and 77 secondary classes over the next 5 years. These increases have had a significant impact. The population is becoming more diverse and the complexity of cases has grown. The number of cases open to social workers is increased, and the need for services at an early help level, as well as at a statutory level, is continuing to rise. Currently, we have 424 children on a child care plan, 524 looked after children in the city, and 1,400 children in need. Our strategy for the last 2 years has been maximising the support that we can give to families with early help and edge of care support. Because of this, we've been able to minimise the need for children to come into care, as well as help children to return home with no care order after time in care. In fact, the number of looked after children in Salford is the lowest it's been since 2012. We've also halved the amount of independent foster placements, and we've seen a significant reduction in out-of-borough placements, which has seen us save around £3 million. Our children's services in Salford are rated as good by Ofsted, which is in itself an achievement, particularly when you consider that we're only one of 2 authorities across Greater Manchester to have that good rating. But we've seen increasing pressures in other areas, and we've been working hard to try and tackle them. Some of that because of changes we couldn't predict, such as the increase in special guardianship orders in place of adoption orders because of a Supreme Court judgment, a rapid rise in families with children who have no recourse to public funds but who have leave to stay, so all costs fall to the local authority, and costs around unaccompanied children via a range of agreements. In terms of the budget proposals from Children's, we've worked really hard to come up with options that will have the least impact and allow us to continue with the vital early help and the preventative work that's necessary to keep families together and continue reducing the number of looked after children, as well as keep children safe in Salford. I'm really grateful to the City Mayor for the additional investment of £150,000, which will enable us to recruit an additional 5 social worker posts to help manage the demand and lower caseloads for our staff, which will relieve some of the pressure. I think we need to recognise the amazing work that the social workers do in Salford. It's an incredibly hard and complex, pressurised job, balancing risk on a daily basis and working hard to keep children safe. I'm also incredibly grateful for the £240,000 investment back into youth services, which we see as a priority for the city. This will enable us to strengthen the youth service offer across the city, and we're working up details as to how to best use that investment. We have listened to the unions and the public feedback, and I think the investment into social work and youth services demonstrates this. Of course, there are some proposals that we won't be able to agree on, but I do feel that relationships are as good as they've ever been in terms of the communication and conversations that we've had with the unions and with service users. The most controversial proposal, I think, is perhaps the proposal to close the Grange residential unit for children with complex needs. I have met with the union, with some family members, and spoken to staff this morning before council. We will continue to have open dialogue around this proposal, but I do think it's one of the few areas where we are actually able to make a saving rather than a cut. That's because it's a 5-bedroom unit with only 2 residents living there, and if we can find suitable alternative accommodation for those working with the families for those children, then we can save an additional £300,000 that we're currently paying for empty beds. We're not looking to spend any less on the care of those residents, but to realise the savings by not keeping open a resource that's underused, that research tells us there's no future demand for, because many parents are using personalised budgets to buy in support at home or using specialist foster care for respite. Neighbouring authorities tell us that they don't have demand for the service for the same reasons. Please be assured, sorry, I've lost my place. Please be assured that if in the future a child was to come forward who needed specialist support, we would source that as appropriate. We'd work with the family based on the needs of that child at that time. And I do think it's important to recognise that we have specialist foster carers who can support children with disabilities and complex behaviour, so it's not automatically a given that children wouldn't be accommodated in the city. First and foremost, we'd be looking at the right placement for that child at that time, working with the family. I want to be clear that we remain absolutely committed to the needs of vulnerable children in this city and their care. In terms of the overall budget, this government are failing Salford. Having taken 47% of our money since 2010, forcing us to increase council tax to support adult social care that absolutely should be centrally funded, and to prop up vital services that are at risk because our budget is being slashed year after year, reducing schools funding, slashing welfare support for vulnerable people. I could go on and on. For the first time, schools are fearing staff redundancies due to real-term cuts to their budget. Dedicated schools grants being reduced, the educational services grants being reduced, and there's no inflationary increase for schools. At a time when we are increasingly looking to schools to take on wider responsibilities and to support vulnerable children, their budgets are also being slashed, and that's a real cause for concern. The Leader of the Opposition spoke about their amendment to the budget and how people want the area to look nice. He also spoke about litter in Eccles. As a councillor for Eccles, I can tell you we do have a litter problem in Eccles and across the city, and that's why the City Mayor has invested some additional funding to try and tackle that. As a Labour councillor, not just for Eccles, no, across the city, as a Labour councillor, we organise regular clean-ups where we go out and pick the litter up with the community. But I digress. The point is, as we've heard from the City Mayor, 26% of children living in Salford are living in poverty. This government are failing those children. More and more people are relying on food banks to scrape by, and in fact the Mustard Tree in Eccles recently put out an urgent request for supplies because they're struggling to meet demand. That's the reality in Eccles. People are struggling to eat, struggling to feed their families. They're struggling to heat their homes, pay the rent and get by. Not thinking the area doesn't look pretty enough. Families are being hit left, right and centre by Tory government austerity. Bedroom tax, benefit sanctions, enforced council tax rises, benefit cap reductions from the £26,000, which was supposed to be aligned to average earnings, scrapped to £20,000. And council services cut thanks to the government taking nearly half of Salford's money from us. Low pay, part-time hours, 0-hour contracts, changes to disability benefits. That's the reality in Salford. Now, this is the City Mayor's first budget. Once again, as a Cabinet, we have spent months having weekly meetings going through this budget line by line. You've seen the papers, and we have gone through it line by line. We're waking up personally at 4 o'clock in the morning, worrying about how we're going to find the extra £15.8 million cuts on top of the cuts we've had to find year on year. Struggling to do our very best in the face of vicious government cuts. And once again, the opposition rock up with one page, talking about more money to go into community budgets to make the place look pretty. Well, I wish I lived in your world. Unfortunately, I live in the real world, where services are slashed, staff worry every year whether they will still have a job, but more importantly, whether the services that they believe in, that they deliver, will still be around to support vulnerable people in Salford. They talk about people living within the means. It's easy to say when you're not going without food so you can feed your children or heat your home, isn't it? Now, I'm proud to serve in the City Mayor's Cabinet, and I'll continue to support him to do all we can to stand up for the people in this city, to fight this government, to shout for the needs of Salford, and to take real action to implement the anti-poverty strategy that's being developed. And I think, really, I hope that people will stand together to fight for the very best for the people in this city, and I hope that the unions and our residents will stand up for us to shout for Salford. Thanks.
Yeah. Councillor Stone, I gave you longer than 5 minutes because I thought it was important that you explained about the education. So can I now ask Councillor Jolly?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sorry.
So, yeah, I'm not started yet for me 5 minutes.
Sorry. Can I just say that there is water arrived outside if anybody needs a glass of water. It is outside now. Thank you.
Okay, we're on. Yeah, I wasn't actually going to comment on one thing I will say now until Councillor Turner mentioned it, and it is very it's beyond depressing that yet again this hoary old trope of it's all the fault of the Labour government. If they can't do better than that after all these years, then quite frankly they have no arguments. I mean, again, I'm sure other people will say this. Until the financial crisis, the international banking financial crisis, the public finances in this country were extremely healthy and better than they'd ever been under any Tory government for decades and decades. What has happened, of course, as any sensible economist will say, is that the Tories tackled this in wholly the wrong manner by going for hyper-austerity, and if we are in the position we are today, it's because of those policies, not to do with the Labour government. Okay, I'll come on to the things I was going to say. First of all, there is mention in the documents of 100% business rate retention pilot, and this relates to what's going on in Surrey. We're in that pilot next year, and if you look at the documents, you'll see for next year, when you look at government support, it's not so much expressed in revenue support grant, that disappears. It's council tax, business rates and business rate top-up, which subsumes the revenue support grant. So it's all going to surround how the business rate system works. We understood that the whole point is that there will be checks and balances, top-ups and tariffs, and nobody will be particularly worse off. What seems to have been said to Surrey, and there has been mention of a figure that has been shown to Surrey, which nobody else knows about, is around the business rate retention. So what does this mean? And I would call upon the Mayor and other local authority leaders to be saying to the government, we must see those figures, because are Surrey being told something which we're not being told, and are Surrey being told something which probably means that high business rate base areas are going to do very well, thank you very much, which means that low business rate base areas will not do so well. These are things which these are important issues. What has Surrey been told? And they are being kept from other local authorities, and that really, a demand needs to go into the government to see the figures that Surrey have been given. My other point, and the Overview Scrutiny Board wants to look at this area as well. My other point is about social care. And I was reminded this morning, as a report in the press, that social care spending has actually gone down 8% since 2010. Down 8% with all the extra pressures on that system through local authorities. And I remember a few years ago, before the coalition government, a Director of Social Services, and I think it was probably Neil Thornton as well, giving us a presentation about social care costs. And those showed that the national amount, the national spend from local authorities was about 11 or 12 billion. And the figures also showed that if we did nothing and simply continued to pay the same way, with the same criteria, with the increasing pressures on the system and the increasing elderly population, by 2025 those costs will be over 20 billion. And if we actually took off the means test, they will go up to over 30 billion. Now that is what we are facing, the cost of social care. And at the same time, because of the squeeze on local authorities, the numbers are actually going down. This is a crisis of very large proportions, because this could destroy local government finance and it can destroy the NHS. Now, perhaps that's what some people in the Tory party want, to destroy those systems so they can build up an alternative in their free market image. But this is a huge issue. It's probably the greatest social issue facing this country in the next generation. The government, and to put it bluntly, to solve it will cost money. No matter how efficient you are, you're going to need money in that system. And the government is completely evading that issue and tinkering at the edges, saying we can put 3% in our council tax, which barely scratches the surface of that issue. The government is running away from the biggest social problem this country is facing, and it has to be held to account for that, but it is our people and our finances which are going to suffer.
Thank you, Councillor Jolly. Could I now call Councillor Reynolds, please?
Right, thank you, Madam Mayor. Some members have already spoken on this, but I think it does no harm, after I moved the social care motion last month, to just remind members and reiterate that we have been put in a position where we're having to fund the social care funding gap through council taxation and a deduction from the new homes bonus, on top of the horrendous savings that we're having to make. You know, it's a further 2.2 or over a further 2.2 loss to this city. The second biggest loss right across the country. You know, we've been affected more than a hell of a lot of authorities here. There's been absolutely no robust or transparent methodology applied to this by the government to deal with social care funding. We should have new money, as I said last month. It should be based on need. As I've said before, we're the 22nd most deprived authority in the country, with high levels of poverty, you know, large inequalities, particularly in health in some parts of the city. And as the Mayor and as the City Mayor and the Deputy Mayor have said this morning, you know, this lack of new funding, it's putting increased pressure on the poorest people in our city, while the wealthier authorities, particularly down south, are benefiting. And this government should be ashamed of its total lack of fairness in relation to the funding of social care when we've got a national crisis on our hands.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillor Garrido.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I refer to the City Mayor's opening statement when he moved the resolution, which I think he moved very well. But he said exactly what we expected him to say, and exactly what we heard him say. Previously. Two words always come into any speech that the City Mayor makes, that's austerity and cuts. It's a pity that we didn't hear more of these from his colleagues over the last few years. Councillor Johnny said, can't we do better than referring to what was done by the last Labour government? The Conservatives have had plenty of time to do something about it. Can I remind Councillor Jolly that this council, this Labour-controlled council, right, has had 50 years to do something about it, and they haven't done. You all sit there with smug faces, complaining about the Tory government, complaining about the Tory amendment, and at the end of the day, you have had nearly 50 years running this city to make sure that we're in a better economic state than we currently are. Now, you can complain about what's happened in the last year or so, but look back at yourselves, look back at what you have achieved, and you all ought to be ashamed of yourself, the state that you left this city in. And I'm really surprised that for some reason you keep getting yourself rejoiced. I can only believe that people are just not understanding that really they could have had a much better run city. And why am I saying that? I'm saying that because after getting a Conservative government who actually capped the increase on council tax, this council approved increases on rates and council tax over a 10 or 12-year period amounted to something like 80%. 80%. And what did we do with that money, Madam Chair? It was wasted by and large, right? We were overstaffed, we were inefficient, and we did not spend our money wisely. We have had millions at our disposal to spend, and it's proved, in fact, by the cuts that have been made, that we have still actually been able to run reasonable services, not as good as we require, and certainly I'm one of those who will join with the City Mayor and anybody else that says that adult health and social care is in an abysmal state. We ought to be having more money, and I certainly support our leader and anybody else that's willing to say that to the government. I don't believe they're giving enough, and I totally support any move to actually have more money. But, having said that, there are lots of things that we could have been doing over the years, and I believe there are lots of things that we can still be doing. Don't belittle suggestions that the opposition might make about having a cleaner city. There is something about having a better quality of life that improves everything. And for many people in all parts of the city, right, standing at a bus stop with beer cans around your feet, which certainly I recognised in Old Riverside the other day, there's nothing more dispiriting to the human nature than forcing people to live in those conditions. I'm really glad to say that the City Mayor has obviously recognised what we said last year. I mean, you spoke about or laughed off the suggestion that in fact you haven't done things that we've asked you to do. Well, last year we asked you to spend more money on cleaning up our city, and this year the City Mayor, thank you very much, has actually spending an extra £300,000 on cleaning up the city. Still not enough, but you know, we recognise that in these times of difficulty, we have to tread very, very carefully. There are areas where we can make savings. And we spoke about communications, and there was sort of looks of incredulity when we said that we could make savings on communications. The City Mayor, in fact, referred to the fact that we said that the City Mayor and the Council ought to communicate better. Yes, but you don't need a press department of the size that we have in this council. What is wrong with the City Mayor issuing his own press release, writing his own press release? I'm sure he's quite capable of doing that. We all write our own press releases. We're all capable of reading the newspaper every day. We all have iPads in this council. News is there every minute of the day. We all know what's going on. We don't need to be spending hundreds of thousands or millions of pounds on a communications department to tell us something which we know already. And that is clearly one of the savings that we could be making. We can't go on blaming others for the suffering that we have in the city. We have to accept some of that blame ourselves. And the sooner the controlling Labour group on this council start to accept that blame, the better off we will be. Now, again, you belittled the amendment that we put forward, a single piece of paper. Well, Madam Chair, it's not surprising. Unfortunately, at the moment, we have a council which is made up of 60 members. 8 of those are Conservative opposition, and the other 52, or 51 unfortunately at the moment, are made up from the Labour Party. Can I say that with an extra member at the next council meeting from Curzon Ward, we will certainly be able to put a little bit more towards combating the Labour policies in this council. And if we had had more councillors over the last few years, then we would certainly not be in the state that we currently are in. Let's stop looking to the past. Let's stop looking to the past, let's start looking to the future, and let's start pulling our finger out and spending the money far more wisely than we need, instead of the millions that we've spent on the stadium, instead of the millions we spent on the rugby club, instead of the millions we're proposing to spend on the RHS, who have totally ignored local residents in terms of the traffic situation that they're going to be creating in Worsley. You seem to be content on destroying areas. We're doing nothing at all to actually remedy that. And I don't actually see any proposals yet from this council. We talk about the national infrastructure budget. What proposals have we put forward to government on how the infrastructure on our roads, etc., are actually going to be dealt with? I've not seen any report on that yet.
Thank you. I have got you down, Councillor Antipas. Can I have Councillor Bushell, please?
Thank you, Chair. The City Mayor said earlier that last week we launched our anti-poverty strategy. And we heard the truth then about how poverty is impacting on lives in Salford. And everyone in the room was moved. Correct me if I'm wrong, I did not see any of the opposition at that launch last week. What you have mentioned is about people living within their means. Does this mean that 1 in 36 households that's been forced to go to food banks, are they living within their means? The 7 children in the class of 30 that are living in poverty, and the teachers who are having to find sensitive ways to make sure children in their class are fed. This is happening. We're hearing stories of food being kept in secret drawers so that children can access them. People in this city and across the country, because of your government, are actually going hungry. Does it mean that welfare reforms, when it's continuing to hurt our poorest households, and we know that 1 in 6 working households receive help through tax credit to top up their wages, in-house poverty is at the highest ever. Nearly a quarter of all jobs across GM still pay less than the real living wage. Young people under 25 are the worst hit, with over half, that's 55%, working on low-paid jobs. And for under 18s, they're getting as little as £3.87 per hour. Poverty has a devastating and long-lasting impact on lives. Research has shown that children who've moved into poverty are 40% more likely to develop social, emotional and behavioural problems compared to those out of poverty. We've said many times in this chamber that what's happening in our lifetimes is absolutely shocking. We would never, ever have believed this years ago that this could happen. If it was my party, I would be completely ashamed. I wouldn't be putting my head in the sand, ignoring real people and asking them to live within their means.
Thank you, Councillor Boshall. Can we have Councillor Fletcher? Sorry, your mic's not on, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. You've given me a few more points to make. As expected, the Tories would say the economy is working. Well, I don't think it is. If the economy is working, how is it, as the City Mayor has stated, the Assistant City Mayor has stated, that 1 in 36 of the families in Salford are still going to food banks, and it's steadily increased? Secondly, how is it that 8 million people in this country need to obtain working tax credits simply to make ends meet? Explain that one. Another point I'd like to make about the sickness pay that you wanted to take off some of the staff from this council. Anybody can feel ill and fall ill at any time. Surely you've thought about that. It could happen to any one of us, and to penalise it is entirely wrong. And finally, As you say, the deficit has been reduced, maybe slightly, but is it worth all this pain for so little gain?
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor King.
Chair of the Council, I just want to mention briefly before I mention the comments I'm going to make about the Mayor's fine speech and the support for the credit union. Councillor Robin Garrido said that we should look to the future and not the past. I would remind you that it was your very leader who went back to the past and mentioning the financial crisis, which you said was caused by the then Labour government. Where did the financial crisis start? Actually, it started in 3 American states. Now, I don't have the name of them, I did know them, but I've forgotten them. And the reason was because there was one of the commercial banks who had some dodgy loans, and there's an interbank lending system. And because this bank had some loans that were going delinquent, other banks, of course, within that community knew about this, and they refused to lend to that bank. The result was that that bank collapsed. And then, because banks are now very much international, that had an international impact. And that's exactly how the financial crisis started and ended up impacting virtually the whole of the Western world. And we are now picking up the pieces because of that. In addition to that, there's extreme regulations being placed on virtually every bank, including small banks, like, for example, the credit union. That is what I want to touch on today. So don't, please, misrepresent what has actually happened with the international financial crisis. And I would now like to comment on the Mayor's fine speech and to thank him in particular. I might say declare an interest here as well, because I'm now chair of Salford Credit Union, so I have to declare that interest. I have no pecuniary interest in it. I don't get paid. It is all voluntary. It's free. None of our directors get paid, unlike, I might add, the international banks who get millions of pounds payment. All of our labour is free, and I want to make that quite clear. We have had our 28th annual AGM recently, and we are very pleased to welcome the City Mayor as our keynote speaker. And I wasn't aware at that time that we were going to get this offer of support for our strategic partnership, and we very much welcome that. Heretofore, as I said, we've been going for 28 years, and this is the first strategic partnership we have had between the City Council and Salford Credit Union. And we will do everything to ensure that that strategic partnership is honoured on our side. It will mean a number of things for us. Firstly, it will mean that, for example, our operations are centralised in one building. We're very small. We've got 5 or 6 staff or something like that. We're operating on 2 sites currently. Those of you who've been in management will know it's extremely managed if you're working on 2 different sites. Our chief executive and manager got to chase about from one building to the next. Extremely difficult to manage that. There are also costs involved, of course, because you've got to fund 2 sites rather than 1, and that will be extremely helpful to us. And I will thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for that. It will also mean that we will be able to help some of the people who approach us now for loans, because it will be able to help maybe to underwrite some of the loans, but we will lend judiciously. Unlike the payday lenders who just are not bothered about driving people into debt, we will do it on an ethical basis. We will check their credit rating and ensure that the people are afford to pay that loan back. So we'll be able to help more people than currently is the case. We hope to grow our small bank as well, so that it will become maybe the bank for the generality of the population, rather than seeing currently maybe a bank for poorer people. That is not the case. In most countries, it is part of the normal financial services in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, in the Republic of Ireland. 60-70% or 80% of the people are members of credit unions. Unlike here, it's a very, very tiny percentage. We hope also to increase our collection points. And most banks are closing down their branches. We hope to open up more collection points in the city. And I might add here that sadly we lost one of our very good collection points because the Ascension Church tragically burned down very recently. That was one of our collection points. That was one of the services that they provided for the local community in cooperation with ourselves. Up to date, we have, for example, saved something in the region of £1 million in interest payments by comparison with the people borrowing from us and people who might have been borrowing from payday loans or even from ordinary banks. That £1 million is then invested back into the local community, what we economists call the velocity of money, where it circulates, and people buy locally, local people buy locally, they shop in local shops, local taxis and local chippies, local pubs and so on. So that means that community is kept alive financially. That's the way we'll be able to continue to support even more communities, more organisations. We'll also be able to save more people from the clutches of these payday lenders, 4,000%. Just imagine, how can that in any way be believed? But that's exactly what's happening. And this support will therefore help us to be able to do more on that. So I would like to again thank you, Mr. Mayor, for this excellent offer, for this strategic partnership. And I'm sure that both sides will honour it. So thank you very much for your support.
Thank you, Councillor King. I've been very lenient this morning, but there is quite a large number of people that wish to speak. So can I just remind you that it's normally 5 minutes? So can we try and stick to that, unless you're seconding the motion? Thank you. Could I call Councillor Lancaster? Sorry, you've had to wait.
Well, I didn't intend to speak about the budget cuts and the poverty which there is in this city and right throughout parts of the North West. I feel that I had to say that obviously that is an important element which we must take into account. But when Councillor Galido stood up and said we ought to be ashamed of what we've done for the last 50 years, I was astounded. There's a lot of people in this council chamber over the years have done a lot of work to regenerate this city, including members of the opposition. When I took over as housing in '74, there was more slums in this city than I care to mention. It was deplorable, the housing conditions in this city. Some of our schools were in deprivation and poverty looking, and the industry which we've encouraged into the city is second to none. Look at the Lowry, look at the work on the quays, look at Port Salford. There's all sorts of regeneration which has taken place, which is second to none. The regeneration on the Manchester border is second to none, and it's somewhere we can really be proud of, that with the redevelopment of the city has got an ongoing process, something which is working in spite of the recycling, in spite of the cuts we're having to make. However, I did want to speak about one topic, which was welcoming the Mayor's money which he's donated or said to us we can spend 300,000 on cleansing. I want to make this plea. If you think that's going to solve the problem in the city, you're wrong. What has got to be recognised is, and it applies to a number of cities, we've got to have pride in our areas, and we've got to look at help from the residents themselves to solve this problem. I find it deplorable that fly tipping takes place the way it does. I won't mention the area, in 3 weeks, I've had to have people back every week in 3 weeks to clear the same spots of rubbish which have been dumped. And that's not residents, that's clearly somebody who's dumping rubbish in the city. I believe we've got to be tough. And I think, and I haven't spoken to the Mayor of this, but I believe we ought to look at penalties for fly tipping bigger than what they are, and for dog fouling as well. I want to see more control on that, and I want to see the residents themselves have some control on it. I sat yesterday evening and watched quite openly somebody dog fouling with their father or the father, where they're with their owner with him at the time, foul on the pavement. And when I told them about it and said that wasn't an acceptable way to work, they just said, mind your own business. Well, it is my business. And we've got to expect the residents of this city to actually join us in actually improving the city's cleanliness by making sure they help in informing people who are not respecting their area, and clearly not in a number of the cases. As Lisa says, a lot of work has been done by community reps in litter picking, but that's fine and that's excellent. That's something we want to encourage, and we have encouraged. We need to go far beyond it, because every one of us have a responsibility to make our city cleaner than it is, and that includes dog fouling as well. I'm not suggesting that we implement penalties like they've got in the Isle of Man, or they're suggesting in the Isle of Man, I don't know if you saw that, where they're taking samples of the dog fouling and actually could trace it back to the owner by each chip and bin. But what I am suggesting is that there needs to be to the owner. But what I am saying, it makes you clearly think that you need to have more penalties for that. I also find it's unacceptable, and I'm not going to mention 3-week bin collection. I don't think it's acceptable for people wholesalely to leave black bins and blue bins and brown bins on the street from 1 week to the next. That's something which to me is not acceptable, because it's not helping to keep our cities clean when those bins are left on the street. So I think we have to look and be more firmer with our proposals, and the 300,000 is a great help. But I'm not going to make an appeal in the Environment Week that we have clearly a better support than we've currently got, both from residents and owners of dogs, to make sure that the place we live in is a cleaner and better place. And I would say to the opposition, I also think daffodils are quite important as well. There is ways of doing that. I remember a couple of years ago where we actually bought a load of bulbs, and residents themselves planted those bulbs in green spaces. That's something like that doesn't cost a lot of money, but it makes people feel a damn sight better than they currently do in some areas now. That's all I wanted to say, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lancaster. I know I'm supposed to be impassioned, but I was nodding at you in agreement on the daffodils. Councillor Kelly.
Obviously, a lot's already been said, and I won't repeat that. However, I would like to congratulate the City Mayor on his first budget speech, because it's not been an easy time. It has been quite difficult for all of us involved. But again, I echo what he said, which is I do want to continue to work collaboratively with the City Mayor team and my fellow colleagues, but also with the staff that have supported us on this budget, and I'd like to thank all of them. But also the trade unions, I want to continue to work with them and the residents, because this budget affects them, us and everybody in this city. I thank Robin for his mention that cross-party support in getting more money, and any initiatives that we can put forward to this government to give more money to adult social care. I'd really appreciate that. So, I look forward to any collaborative working with yourselves on that. But the one point you did make, Robin, was 50 years of Labour control, and that upsets me a little bit, because you are also on this council and your fellow colleagues. And for me, when I became a councillor, yes, I was elected in a ward, but I also am elected for this city. And for me, the only point I'd like to make is one council, one city, and we're all fighting and singing from the same song sheet. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Councillor Collinson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just working?
Yeah, I think so.
I've just been making some notes, really. I just feel quite strongly about some of the things that have been said this morning. And I realise, obviously, that this is the Budget Council, so therefore about money. But a few months ago, we had a presentation from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and a quote that has stuck in my head from that was, "A meeting about us without us is not for us." It's not about designing services and throwing money at them and hoping the problem will go away, because it won't. We need the right people around the table whenever we're trying to help and solve problems. Living within our means, which Councillor Turner has referred to and other people this morning. Obviously we appreciate that a large number of people are accessing food banks for genuine reasons. But just bear this in mind as well. I met two people last week on Swinton Precinct. One who said that she'd done her shopping at the food bank, and then she was going to have her hair coloured at the hairdressers on the precinct, and it was going to cost £80. Well, that's how she used her money. Another person was going, who lives completely on benefits, told a friend of mine about 2 weeks ago that they were going to Mallorca for 4 weeks holiday. Those sort of things need to be looked at. Management needs to be tightened up on that. Litter picks have been referred to. In our wards as well, we all organise and participate in litter picks. I personally very much resent having to go round and pick up other people's litter. I think it's disgusting, but we do it because we want to live in a cleaner, healthier environment. But why should we have to pick up after other people? The NHS and social care, I am hoping and I'm assuming that things have improved, but again, this isn't about money. When my daughter was so ill for the first 3 years of her life, we had literally thousands of pounds worth of equipment in our house because I was nursing her at home. We were never asked for one piece of that equipment back. We've given it back, but we were never asked for it back because, in fact, the wards that had lent us the equipment didn't even know that we had it. There was no system, administration system for booking equipment out and getting it back. I am hoping that that's improved now. I agree with virtually everything that Councillor Stone has said with regards to children's services. I don't think we will ever be able to stop using independent fostering agencies because we are still very short of good foster carers within Salford. We will always have to use those, and we will also always have to use outside placements because some of our young people just cannot be placed within our city. We end up with vacancies in our children's homes, and we think, well, why can't such and such a child, young person, come to that home? We've got quite a few families within Salford where there is absolutely no way on this earth you could put children from those families in the same environment. So there are reasons why we will never be able to get rid of outside placements. And that's really all I wanted to say, but I just want to say that we, on this side, despite what you all think, want the best for the residents of Salford, and we fight for our residents as much as we possibly can. We're not the posh Tories over here. We happen to live in wards that are possibly more affluent than some of the wards that you're representing, but our residents still have their problems as well, and I just want you to bear that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Collinson. Councillor Antrobus.
Thank you. Like Councillor Lancaster, I wasn't going to speak until I heard Councillor Garrido talk about the 50 years that we've had where Salford was a badly run city by Labour. So badly run that in each of those years the public have voted to return a Labour administration and rejected Councillor Garrido when he stood for elected mayor and every Conservative attempt to gain seats in this city. In fact, not only have the people of this city rejected the Tory party, but they have seen the Tory representation here diminished over the years, so we are left with the rather unpleasant rump that we have on the opposition benches. So badly run has this city been that the people have voted Labour, so badly run that people are now choosing to stay in Salford and live in Salford, and people are choosing to move to Salford because it's such a great place to live. So badly run that firms are investing in Media City, that we've created one of the greatest employment engines in Greater Manchester. So badly run that the Royal Horticultural Society wants to locate its prestigious Fifth Garden in Salford. So badly run that at one time our adult social care was trumpeted by the government as being the best in the country. So badly run that people from all over would come to see, how is it you provide such brilliant social care in Salford? Why is it that you're at the forefront with relations with the health service? And why is it that we're no longer in that position? It's not because of 50 years of Labour administration. It's because of nearly a decade of appalling Tory austerity, making the wrong choices, making choices where we're not all in it together. It was very interesting to hear Councillor Turner, who spoke about how employment in the public sector was too much, and how everybody, the government, had to take a lead on this. He's obviously not seen today's Office for National Statistics data, which show that over the Tory years, the number of people employed by the government has increased dramatically, and it's the number employed by local government providing direct services to the people who need it that have plunged dramatically. We're not all in this together. Privilege for some and heartbreak for those of us who live in the Northern Heartlands.
Thank you, Councillor Ashworth. I have two further speakers. Can I just say that we've got the seconder of the original motion, Councillor Hines, to speak, and then we've got a summing up by the City Mayor, his right of reply. So unless there's anything new you're going to add, could I ask Councillor Longshaw, could you be brief, do you think? And Councillor Clarkson, either could you also be brief as well? It's just that we won't have enough time. We have got to do the Treasury Management annual statement. That is a must today. And if we go over 12:30, then we have to have a motion that we carry on, because Treasury Management is important to be heard today as well. So, Councillor Longshaw.
I'd like to thank the Mayor. In terms of the speech and the budget proposal, it was balanced, it was proportionate, and it focused on need. There was a comment that was made by Councillor Garrido about us on this side being ashamed of ourselves. I'm not ashamed of the efforts that the City Mayor, the mayoral team, and this side of the chamber has put in for a balanced, proportionate budget that's focused on need. What I am ashamed of is your government's continued austerity programme and hurtfulness that it's causing the people of this city. It was interesting that some of the comments that were made on our local budget, you decided, a couple of you, Councillor Turner and Councillor Garrido, to concentrate on generalities. Generalities that I would argue are not relevant. One of the things that I would like to do is to say, in terms of the workforce of this city, you made two comments: overstaffed and inefficient. The workforce of this city is not overstaffed, it is not inefficient. Our services are here, they're important to our citizens and businesses across Salford, and they are valued by this side of the chamber. They are not overstaffed, they are not inefficient. We have put in a budget that focuses on need. You gave an alternative budget, to paraphrase a comment that's been made, for daffodils in Worsley. To compare that to 5 additional social workers that Councillor Stone has put in here to support children in dire consequences, in need, you are not relevant.
Thank you, Councillor Longshaw. Councillor Clarkson? Sorry, what's the...
It was not the opposition that compared it to daffodils, it was actually Councillor Antrobus.
Councillor Clarkson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to say, I mean, it's becoming a deeply unedifying experience coming to this council. I could actually write a pro forma for the shape that debates take. I just wanted to briefly touch on a few of the points that have been raised. I'll actually start on a note of accord and say to Councillor King, I think the Salford Credit Union is absolutely fantastic. I'm delighted to see more funding coming into it. I think it's one of the most socially responsible things that we are introducing in this budget, and I think the Mayor's to be commended for adding extra money for it. I think beyond that, Councillor Longshaw, we weren't taking out any social workers. We thoroughly agree with that. This is why it's a relatively modest amendment to the budget. Quite a lot of it is stuff that we agree with. It's just ludicrous to try and sort of compare two things. I mean, it was like having an out-of-body experience to Councillor Lancaster. I actually have a lot of respect for Councillor Lancaster, but imagine if somebody had suggested some sort of fund where we could, I don't know, empower people to make those decisions about how they would maintain the environment in their area. Imagine if somebody had perhaps moved some sort of amendment suggesting that funds could be allocated to it. I despair. I absolutely despair. Councillor Fletcher, yes, it is worth the pain, because it isn't about you and it isn't about me. It's about paying down that debt, reducing that deficit for the children who are in primary school now, for your grandchildren, for mine if I'm ever fortunate enough to be a parent. It's about building a more sustainable and responsible economic model. Now, parties of both views have been responsible of excesses and poor spending judgments, and I'm not going to argue the various merits of different economic systems, but we have a responsibility to future generations. So, yes, it is absolutely worth it. Councillor Antrobus, you mentioned that the electorate constantly put in Labour administration. That's absolutely true. You are a recipient of the current electoral system, and I will say, as a lifelong supporter of proportional representation, it would be a very different makeup of council if we actually applied the votes that people cast in this city. And I'll also finish on a final note and just say that nobody's ever called my rump unpleasant before.
Moving swiftly on, Councillor Hines.
Thank you, Chair. Do you know, I often wonder, and certainly listening to the opposition this morning, feel that we're living in a surreal world. A world that when you wake up in the morning, you wonder whether you've just been dreaming or it's real. I'll take you back 7 years, when it was my job to present the budget. And it was an emergency budget, wasn't it, in the sense that the coalition government was in power after the 2010 election. And I made the points at that time. The opposition thought and said it would be short term. In fact, the Chancellor, the then Chancellor, said that he would clear the deficit within a Parliament. Did that happen? No, it didn't. Years later, he said he would have a surplus by 2020. Do we really think that that's going to happen? No, not at all. It is a totally surreal world we live in. Years ago, as I was growing up, and of course because of my political makeup, I continually and consistently argued about the unfairness of the system that we were living in. I still believe in that, more than ever today, quite frankly. When people talk about money, it's not as though there's not enough money in this country. It's just in the wrong place. That's the problem. It's within the rich and powerful and the plutocracy throughout. Time and time again, I've got up in this chamber, often in response to Councillor Robbie Garrido, when he has said time and time again that it's Conservative governments that have to clear up Labour's mess. Totally untrue. And I pointed out that time and time again, and even offered the opposition to come back to me if I was wrong. Have they ever come back? No. They've repeated time and time again that it's Labour governments that cause the crisis. But never, ever have they come back and justified that position. Totally, totally unreal. We look back, and it's been commented on this morning. Councillor Les Turner, got up and said that when Labour took over in 97, that's when the trouble started. Well, let me tell you, Les, that the debt that was left in 97 was just under 44% of GDP. Gordon Brown brought that down to 33%. in the first Labour government of 1997 to 2001. He then agreed in the next Parliament started to raise monies on spending that was desperately needed after 18 years of a Tory government, on education, on health, on issues like Sure Start, on tax credits, on all these other issues that were vital to people that had been living in a terrible state under the 18 years of Thatcher Majorism. But it never ever got to the 44% that we were left with. Just before the crisis, it was about 38%. And the actual deficit during the Labour years was half, on average, of what the Conservatives under Thatcher and Major had made. Half of it. And I accept, by the way, that the crisis that come about, which was a crisis, as has been said, of the rich and powerful and institutional bankers throughout the world, and where I agree and criticised my government, is that they did allow private debt to get out of hand, quite honestly. Not the actual government spending, which the actual spending under Labour was less than Thatcher and Major as a percentage of GDP. I could have argued, and did argue, that there should have been more spending to reach the point of Thatcher and Major, the spending that they did. So let's get real when we talk about the economy and what's been happening and the crisis that's come about. And I'll remind you again, in 2007, the then Shadow Chancellor, George Osborne, said, "I will stick with Labour's spending policies." Was it that bad that he was going to stick with them? I'm sorry, you live in a different world to where I am. And again, when we listen to the opposition, and I said this last year, there's no contrition about what their government have done and what they're doing. Do you honestly believe, certainly when I come on the council 33 years ago, that we would have been talking about what the Mayor said? And again, I congratulate the Mayor on his speech. Not only the way that he presented it, but the commitment to the poorest people in this city that he wants to do something about. And I congratulate him on that in the most difficult of times that we've done it. But Les Turner talks about, Councillor Les Turner, about everything seems to be wonderful. I don't know where you were reading that from, Les. Who sent you that? May come through the post this morning from Conservative Central Office. But if the economy's doing well, have we got a crisis in the health service? Of course we have. Have we got a crisis in housing? Even Javid says that we've got a crisis in housing. It's broken. Have we got a crisis in our prisons? Of course we have. Have we got a crisis in public services? Of course we have. Have we got a crisis on the railways? Of course we have. You name it, we've got a crisis. Yet the economy is supposed to be booming. Councillor Turner points out that 1 month's surplus, when it's the best time of the year, when people bring in their tax position, and therefore one month has done very, very well. There's more poverty, more inequality in this country than I've known throughout my lifetime. Councillor Gillian Collinson makes comments and gives examples of certain abuses. There will always be that. But get it right. Are you really saying that there isn't a problem with many, many people in this city over the years? Again, touching on what Councillor Lancaster and Antrobus has said. We and what we've able to do in this budget so that the Mayor can put monies into areas of concern. It's because our tax base, based on the capital spending largely that we've made in this city, which the opposition have criticised us for in the past through unsupported borrowing, is now paying dividends, where people, businesses and others come in to give light at the end of the tunnel to go on and improve the conditions for people in this city. But unfortunately, for many at this moment in time, they see no light at the end of the tunnel. They see no hope. And when Councillor Collinson give her examples, I can give many, many more. People that are being sanctioned, people that are committing suicide over and over again. Where's the comments from you on that? That we live now in this awful, awful state of affairs. And I'll finish on this, Madam Mayor. In 2010, I did make a comment at that time, and I'm going to repeat it. Forgive me for people that have already heard it, but there are new members on as well. And it comes from, if you can remember, Lewis Carroll's, I don't know whether it was from Alice in Wonderland or Alice Through the Looking Glass, when he talks about the owl and the panther. And it goes something like this, which summarises, in my view, the inequalities and the problems in Britain and run by a callous, hard Tory government. And it goes, the owl and the panther, I walk through your garden and spy with one eye, an owl and a panther eating the pie. The panther had pie crust, gravy and meat. The owl had the dish as his share of the treat. The banquet was all finished, the owl was a boon. He was kindly permitted to pocket the spoon. Then panther, with knife, fork and a growl, completed the banquet by eating the owl. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hines. So can you formally move? Seconded the motion? Thank you. Could we ask the City Mayor a right of reply?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, how do I sum up all of those comments? But I'll try my best. So we'll start with Councillor Turner. I'm happy that you agree that adult social care should be funded through council tax. That was the whole basis of our ministerial visit on Monday. I'm also happy that you admire my passion because, you know, fundamentally, yes, I do believe a Labour government will better serve the people of this city. And yes, I do believe a Labour government under Jeremy Corbyn will do that. But my passion is because I'm fundamentally committed to doing what's right and doing what's right in an evidence-based way. I'm not here today to make political conjecture, but I'm here today to do what's in the interests, I believe, in the people of this city. You talk about the previous government in 1997, and it's interesting you stopped there. I do agree with some of the points Councillor Hines was making about the previous Labour government around things like private finance initiative and how arguably, in my opinion, we did far too much of that. But what you forgot to say was that that started under a Tory government. It actually started under Norman Lamont in 1992, where we saw the emergence of PFI and private-public partnerships. What we didn't, unfortunately, see under New Labour was a cessation of what is a ghastly policy to pay for infrastructure and public services. Interestingly, on austerity, I don't know what on earth you've been reading of late, but it's quite clear if you go to the World Bank's website or the IMF's or the World Trade Organisation's website for that matter, austerity is not working. The professional economists in the globe internationally are telling us that. It's leading to slow growth and it's leading to a slow recovery. In terms of income inequality, which Councillor Hines also touched on, we've never seen such income inequality since the 1930s. How on earth can we be proud of this record? What the Tories clearly believe in is in-work poverty, workhouse conditions, and this is their model for a Britain of the future. They also drew attention to a note with regards to there being no money. And what's interesting is that note was a rehashed Tory note from Reginald Maudley, the Tory MP. Point being, you did that before we did. Also, what's interesting as well is quite clearly when Councillor Turner spoke, he obviously hadn't read our recent document on No One Left Behind, tackling poverty in Salford. Let me read to you some of the excerpts from that document. Nearly a quarter of all jobs across Greater Manchester still pay less than the real UK living wage of £8.45 per hour, calculated by the Living Wage Foundation. Young people under 25 are particularly badly hit, with well over 55% working in low-paid jobs for as little as £3.87 an hour for under 18s in some cases. Then we move on to social security and welfare. I'm going to to 352. Despite this, Salford continues to receive the lowest homelessness prevention grant in the whole of Greater
Thank you, City Bear. This has taken a bit longer than we thought it would. So we have got an item 6, and before we take the vote, could I ask if somebody could move that we do 15 minutes longer after 12:30? That was moved by Councillor Hines, seconded by Councillor Ferguson. So there will be up to an extra 15 minutes and not finish at 12:30. So can we now move to the vote on the revenue budget and capital programme for 2017-18?
Again, a named vote. Those in favour of the motion, City Mayor Dennett.
Yes.
Councillor Antrobus. For. Councillor Barnes. For. Councillor Bellamy. Agree. For. Councillor Bentham. For. Councillor Boschel. For. Councillor Brocklehurst. For. Councillor Birch. For. Councillor Clarkson. Yes. Councillor Collinson. Councillor Compton. Yes. Councillor Connor. For. Councillor Critchley. For. Councillor Dawson. For. Councillor Ferguson. For. Councillor Fletcher. For. Councillor Robin Garrido. Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Hesling. Councillor Hines. Councillor Humphreys. Councillor Hunt. Councillor Jolly. Councillor Kelly. Councillor King. Councillor Lancaster. Councillor Lee. Councillor Lewis. Councillor Longshaw. Councillor McIntyre. Councillor Merry. Councillor Morris. Councillor Mullen. Councillor Reynolds. Councillor Sharp. Councillor Stone. Councillor Taylor. Councillor Turner. Councillor Walsh. Councillor Warmisham. Councillor Weir. Councillor Michael Wheeler. Councillor Peter Wheeler. Councillor Paul Wilson. Councillor Ronnie Wilson. Motion's carried.
The motion's carried. Can we now move on to... can I just say, we've had 17 speakers, and I hope you all feel that that was a good debate, and that didn't include the 4 movers and seconders who actually moved the motions. So can I thank you also for your politeness during this. I know it's a very difficult time for everybody, but thank you very much, and I hope everybody felt that they'd had time to have their say. Can we move on to item 6, please, which is a report by Councillor Hines regarding the Treasury Management Strategy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, this is, I have to come to the Council 3 times a year, and this is probably the most important, as you can see in your papers, how it sets out what we do with our, if we have any surplus monies, now they're invested on behalf of the people of this city. You know, it shows the capital plans, including the prudential indicators, the minimum revenue provision policy, the Treasury management strategy on investments and borrowings and how they're organised, an investment strategy. The Council uses, as we've said before, capital asset services to advise us, and that, of course, as is shown, costs us the tune of £15,000 a year. Section 2 sets out the Council's capital expenditure plans and the impact on the Council's capital financing requirement. Section 3 shows the Council's expected borrowing position. It also shows the boundaries for the Council's level of debt going forward. It then goes on to discuss the prospect for interest rates going forward, which could rise in 1920. The Council's borrowing strategy is then set out. At the moment, with the difference in interest rates between short and long term, it is cheaper for the financial director to borrow short. Of course, he's looking at this all the time and how that might change if a change is needed to benefit us. Section 4 sets out the Council's policy on investments, which is to prioritise security, liquidity and return. Capita of a creditworthiness service that the Council uses to determine where and place the money. And then if you look at Section 5, that this is about Treasury management policy. The statement states the Council's policies quite clearly, and then we've got a number of appendix A, B, C, D, E, F, G and H. So it is a very important document that shows the cash flow. Now we use that cash flow going forward in the interests of this city, which are once again, going up after the debate that we've had this morning, has served us very, very well. It's encouraged growth in the city where we've managed to use our resources to the best intentions and for the people of this city. I'll try and answer any questions that anybody has, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hines. Are there any questions or comments to Councillor Hines? Councillor Clarkson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's really more of a comment. It's just to once again thank the officers of the Council for their continuing hard work on this. The Treasury management is exceptionally well maintained, and I'd also like to pay credit to Councillor Hines, who has an arduous task on his hands. I think we can all agree with that, but he's always extremely open and honest about what he's doing. And whilst, unlike the Mayor, I may not share his political proclivities, I think he manages the job with aplomb. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more comments or questions? No. Thank you very much. Can we move to, do we approve the recommendations which are detailed in this very full report? All those in favour? Aye. All those against? Thank you, Councillor Hines. Can we now, that concludes the meeting, the business of this meeting, so may I call this meeting to a close. Thank you.